Good day, CannaSphere family. Welcome to another episode of CannaSphere Live, where we look at all the ins and outs of the cannabis industry in Africa and beyond. I hope you're having a great day wherever you are, listening and watching us on CTV, on DSTV, channel 263, 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, 8:30 on a Thursday, and Sunday at 7 p.m. Welcome. You have entered a new sphere and a new spectrum of your life. The fact that you are open to learning about cannabis and this beautiful plant and what it can do to the planet means that you have reached a tipping point in your life. A tipping point that is urgently needed by our whole planet as we move forward into eventually a land of abundance. Right now, it is certainly not necessarily an abundant place. But don't forget that the cannabis industry is also a movement. So tell your friends and tell your friends and tell your friends' friends to watch the show to find out exactly what's going on in the exciting, exploding cannabis industry. We've got lots coming up in today's show. Noxy is going to be talking about the smart shopper's guide to cannabis. Jeff is going to be talking about short path of distillation to enrich crude oil. Dr. Carmen is going to be talking about cannabis and period pain. Cuban is going to be talking about cannabis perpetual harvests. My compadre and producer Linda Siboto has lost his voice, so will not be joining us to give you the headlines, but I will give those to you. Good day, 420 Central. Thank you for joining us. Juicy Field's billion-dollar fallout may have hit 300,000 investors. 300,000 investors, guys. You know how significant that is, number-wise. Nati Ferreira is working on with the Agricultural Research Council to turn a historic Cape wine farm into a hemp center. Very excited to hear about that. I have visited that space and it's huge potential for growth. Health workers slam soft treatment for cannabis regulators facing corruption charges. And Kenyan President Al-Saida hopes cannabis will get him elected in the upcoming elections. And finally, Russia prepares to swap his cannabis detainee Griner for an arms dealer and a murderer. Well, let's talk about that after Brett gives the details. Brett, over to you in the beautiful Limpopo province with the headlines. Take it away.
Hi, good day from the CannaSphere TV news desk in Limpopo, where we're under a thick cloud today and experiencing somewhat unseasonal rain here in the mountains. Our top story is the continued fallout from the Juicy Fields scam, as the scale of the biggest fraud in cannabis history becomes clearer. Over 300,000 investors, mainly in South America, Africa, and Europe, have collectively lost billions of dollars. A major legal action is underway in Spain to find out exactly how much has disappeared, mostly into secret bank accounts in Lithuania and Cyprus. This after the Juicy Field founders vanished in mid-July, leaving behind unpaid employees and out-of-pocket investors. This footage is from a Juicy Fields promo video with a voice-over report by podcaster The Recovering Hunbot.
Because the money from new investors was being paid to earlier investors. Many who withdrew money ended up putting more money back in, and some even took out loans to do so. Some have compared Juicy Fields to OneCoin, and it is thought that tens of millions of euros or perhaps billions were pumped into the company. The exact number of investors worldwide is not known, but estimates say it could be around 300,000 individuals. Overall, Juicy Fields seems to have the hallmarks of a classic exit scam. Juicy Fields offered high returns, investors lost the ability to withdraw funds, and social media accounts vanished.
Master grower Nati Ferreira is working with the Agricultural Research Council to transform the historic Birch wine estate in the Western Cape into a hemp research center. The farm, owned by the council, will be the site of Ferreira's authorized hemp grow. He's finally received his permit after a 5-month wait and will be overseeing the planting of 8 hectares of hemp at Birch. There are plans to use the sheds and buildings for a hemp research center and for processing, and there's a hemp deli restaurant and nursery in the pipeline. The National Health, Education and Allied Workers Union, NAHAWU, has criticized the Department of Health for reinstating the suspended head of regulatory affairs, Dr. Anban Pillay. Dr. Pillay, who's ultimately the man in charge of cannabis licenses, was suspended after a special investigation unit report that implicated him in the Digital Vibe scandal. You remember that's where the family of former health minister Zweli Mkhize was alleged to have benefited from a corrupt tender. Dr. Pillay is still facing criminal charges, but has been taken back at the health department on a lower pay grade after a disciplinary hearing. The union says this is outrageous and shows that government is ultimately not serious about rooting out corruption. Kenya's presidential hopeful, Professor George Wajakoja, is an outsider in next week's elections in that East African country. But his Roots Party has brought cannabis legalization to the center of its presidential campaign and says that the money raised from legalizing industrial hemp and medicinal cannabis should be used to pay off Chinese debt. Prof. Wajakoya appeared recently on Kenya's Citizen TV.
Now there's a direct question there. Have you smoked weed?
Never smoked, but I'll smoke it on the day I will be sworn in to exorcise the demons from State House, where Kenyatta was buried, Parliament and KICC. Those colonial demons that remained, they will be. I'll spaff around there to remove them so that we can have a corrupt-free country.
Kenya's presidential elections are on 9 August. In international news, it appears that diplomatic discussions are underway to return US basketball star Brittany Griner back home in exchange for an arms dealer and a convicted murderer. CNN revealed exclusively at the weekend that Russia was prepared to swap Griner, who's facing cannabis charges in Moscow, and fellow American Paul Whelan for arms dealer Victor Bout and a somewhat surprising second choice. CNN's Natasha Bertrand picks up the story.
Yeah, Allison, so what we've learned is that in response to the Russian proposal to trade that arms dealer Victor Bout for the 2 Americans detained in Russia, Paul Whelan and Brittany Griner, the Russians actually put forward their own request. And they said, well, we don't want just Victor Bout. We also want this guy named Vadim Krosikov, who was convicted in Germany in just last year, about 7 months ago in December of 2021, for murdering in broad daylight a Chechen fighter. And the Germans sentenced him to life in prison.
High stakes, as it were. Back to you, Trenton.
Oh, so much going on, so much chaos. I mean, first of all, the Juicy Fields thing, as we're getting into this, is just unraveling. But what I don't understand, and maybe because I'm not a cyber criminal, I don't understand that anybody thinks they can get away with something so seismic in this modern day and age. I mean, with the tracking and tracing that we have, with the, how are they just going to hide money? It's completely impossible. Are they going to go and do what they do in James Bond and get plastic surgery and change the way they look? I just can't believe that anybody would have the audacity to do something so public and really think they can get away with it. I mean, how crazy.
Yeah, it's how modern money launderers and fraudsters work. It's just multiple transfers of thousands of small amounts into different bank accounts, into cryptocurrencies. And so it becomes very hard to track the eventual source of some funds that pop up in a bank in Cyprus, because they wouldn't have come straight from Juicy Fields head office, if you know what I mean. Yeah,
that's why we need blockchain. Do you really think that Kenyan candidate has ever smoked weed before, Brett?
I'm not sure, but I think if he thinks there's any money to be made out of cannabis, never mind to pay off the Chinese debt. He's maybe smoking his socks.
Exactly, and to be honest, this is my personal opinion. Think what you like, but I think this Brittany Griner thing is actually a disgrace. To be honest, I think that yes, absolutely, her being arrested in the first place and being put in the middle of this political war is also a disgrace. But to trade off, known murderers, I think is disgraceful, and I really think it's very sad that we've got to that. And the other thing is, which I must commend the Russians on, is they said publicly that the Americans should keep the dirty laundry in the back and should actually not be publicizing this whole conversation. It should be something that's done behind closed doors. No one knows what goes on, but the fact that they've actually paraded this whole deal into the general public space really, I think, is quite sad, and a sad reflection on what we have to do to get what we want sometimes in life.
Yeah, modern day age.
Modern day and age. Right, Brett, on that positive note, things are still positive in some way. So let's cross over to Noxy, who's going to talk about the Smart Shopper's Guide to Cannabis. That sounds exciting.
Sounds exciting because it is exciting, Trenton. Good afternoon and welcome back to the CannaSphere Lifestyle News Desk with me, the Kush Queen, bringing you all things lifestyle, art, and entertainment in the CannaSphere. Now, there are so many ways to consume marijuana, but nothing can beat the fresh experience of smoking marijuana flower. There are many factors to consider when shopping for flower. With such a wide selection of strain choices these days, you can basically customize your high. Having said that, here are things that you should be looking for when shopping for your weed at a dispensary. We like to call it CannabisPhere Africa's Smart Shopper Guide to Marijuana. Doesn't it sound amazing? Firstly, the first thing you want to consider when you shop for your weed is the effects. Now, every strain has its own effects that can be categorized as uplifting, sedating, or a little bit of both. Let your bartender know about the effects that you're looking to achieve, and then you can take it from there. At number 2, you definitely want to consider the potency. Understanding the potency of THC or CBD in the flower you are buying is an important factor. Generally, anything above 20 to 25% THC is considered very, very strong and has potent psychoactive properties, while those who are new to THC are advised to start with strains below 18% THC. For a balanced effect, you can also check out the THC-CBD ratios. Some strains have a higher CBD content to help counter the THC, resulting in a deliciously balanced high. At number 3, you want to check the size of your bud. Bigger buds usually mean better quality, but this isn't always the case. Some growers filter out the smaller nugs, which go into pre-rolls, while the large nugs rake in more cash when they are sold as cannabis flower. Some dispensaries and brands may sell smaller nugs at a discounted price, so you want to look out for those deals if you're up for a bargain, which I always am. At number 4, color. Premium flowers should be various shades of green and sometimes with the tinge of purple, orange, or yellow in its hairs. While color doesn't indicate good weed, you should avoid buds that look like they've been through a lot. They look like they've been bleached or have irregularly saturated colors, because this can indicate that they haven't been stored properly. At number 5, you want to touch on the smell. Now, we talked about this last week. Your nose can tell you a lot about cannabis flower. Some strains smell spicy, musky, or like gasoline, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing. While others will smell like a fruit or like a flower garden, have strong pineapple or citrus smells, or even smell like flowers thanks to its aromatic compounds. Now, at number 6, you want to check the popularity of this strain. If you're somebody who visits a dispensary or if you're part of a cannabis club, it never hurts to ask your bartender which strains have been flying off the shelves lately. They can share useful insider knowledge on the good stuff that's popular in your area, perhaps because certain growers can make terrific yields off of a certain strain. At number 7, last but not least, you want to check the price, okay? Especially now, inflation is cray-cray. There's weed at the low and high end of the spectrum, but for many consumers, the mid-range buds are where quality and price meet perfectly. Lower priced flower can also produce an excellent high. Bottom shelf cannabis can still work well for people who are on a tight budget, like me. I am on a tight budget. I don't know about everybody else. Trenton, are you worried about budget these days?
No. Of course, everybody's worried about tight budget right now, you know. So right? I think cost is important, and but I think what's also important to highlight there is that there is this obsession, especially from the sort of the die-hard cannabis industry, that you want to get THC that's as high as possible in your bud. But that is not necessarily, does not necessarily mean it's better cannabis, because what you have to take into consideration is the terpenes and the flavonoids and all the other things that are in the cannabis. So it's not always about. I read a report the other day that said that, you know, the THC level in cannabis doesn't necessarily mean it'll get you higher, because it's all relative. So I think potency is important, but it's not everything, and there's become a bit of an obsession about it. But the general consensus and the word on the street that I'm hearing is that we have to look at the other things. So it's not just about power. It's not just about bigger is better. Sometimes it's not.
Yes. Yes, 100%.
You agree? Great, Noxy. Thank you for that. I will take all those things on board. Next time I go to Pick and Pay with my smart shopper card, we'll see you next time. Right now, we're going to cross over to Jeff, who's going to talk about short path of distillation to enrich crude oil. I bet you didn't know how to do that.
Hi everyone. So today we're going to tackle that question about how do you ultimately enrich and concentrate those cannabinoids and essentially break it down into the different fractions that are in a crude oil. Well, I've got a short little video to show you, and while it's playing, I'll explain to you exactly what goes into short path distillation. Essentially what we have is we have a heating mantle where the crude oil is put in and the heat is applied. And then you would put this entire system under vacuum. So you'd have a vacuum pump, and then as it starts to boil, ideally, you have a situation you've really de-waxed and decarboxylated that oil so it doesn't pop as much, but it would move up the vapor and it would slowly start to condense across that coil. And as that condenses, we get fractions that come off. Now, that first fraction that drips out is usually what goes to the initial reception, and that's kind of the heads of an extraction. And anything that makes it past that will eventually go into the coal trap and be protecting your pump. But this body that we see, the second part, is called the main body. And this is where we're really starting to get most of the cannabinoids of interest. And you'll notice that as it goes through the vapors, it starts to cool, and then it forms this nice oil that drips into that actual flask. And that there you can see there's the second bigger flask fraction, and that's where most of your cannabinoids are located. And essentially you have the final fraction, which is kind of the tails, as they refer to it. And you have your head, your body, and your tails. And you'll notice the different color between those different fractions. And each of those contain different continents or components. And essentially that's what short path distillation is. It is chemistry effectively, but it's all performed under high vacuum to generate all these different fractions. And then on the international news front, we saw Switzerland from the 1st of August basically allow that any GP can prescribe medicinal cannabis and doesn't need something like a special access provision, like what we see in South Africa through Section 21, where it's an arduous and a bit of a lengthy process to get approval on a case-to-case basis. Now from August, Switzerland is allowing anyone with a prescription to get medicinal cannabis if their practitioner or clinician approves it. Back to you, Trenton.
Yes, another domino falls as we slowly move towards enlightenment and global transformation where we can all consume cannabis however we please. I think it's a good move forward. What do you think is the next country that's going to come online? Any guesses?
Yeah, it's relative. Online for what? Responsible adult use is the ideal. For medical, it's one of all of Europe is opening up. I would like to see more Asian countries like Thailand starting to look at it more prodigiously. I mean, somewhere like India, which has a traditional use, looking at bringing medical online more thoroughly would be quite big, considering the scope of that part of the world when it comes to pharmaceutical manufacturing, medicinal, herbal products. So very interesting times.
Completely. I think there will be some tipping points. We've discussed this before, one being federal legalization in America, secondly, recreational in Germany. I think those are two of the biggest tipping points that are going to happen in the next 12 to 24 months. And at some point, it's just going to completely roll across the planet. So it's a great time to be involved in the industry and exciting times ahead. Thanks for that, Jeff. We'll see you same time, same place. Right now, we're going to cross over to Dr. Carmen in Durban, who is going to talk about cannabis and period pain.
Thank you, Trenton. So I'm Dr. Carmen, as Trenton has already mentioned, and period pain is also known as dysmenorrhea, and it's common. About 50% of people who menstruate will actually have pain, especially in the first few days of bleeding. Now, period pain can be caused by underlying conditions such as fibroids, for example, but it may also just occur purely due to the release of prostaglandins, which are produced by the uterus to help the uterus to contract and shed its lining. Now, prostaglandins also affect the contractility of the blood vessels in the uterus, and this can sometimes disturb the blood supply and lead to nerve sensitivity. Women are often prescribed hormonal birth control and or anti-inflammatory drugs to help to reduce the symptoms of period pain. Now, these drugs can come with some side effects, and they may increase the risk of blood clotting, they may cause bleeding stomach ulcers, and even increase your risk of certain cancers. What's more is that up to 10% of women will have absolutely no relief from these commonly prescribed medications. So could cannabis be an effective and safe alternative? Well, Sir John Russell Reynolds was the personal physician of Queen Victoria, and he widely acknowledged that she received monthly doses of cannabis indica for her menstrual discomfort throughout her life. Research also shows that both CBD and THC help to reduce prostaglandin production. And CBD helps to relax the muscles of the uterus, relieving spasms, and also opening up the blood vessels, which may further relieve menstrual pain. A 292 woman with severe dysmenorrhea revealed percent had tried medical cannabis for their period pain relief. And of those, 89% of them said that cannabis helped, sometimes even instantly. Now, there are many potential routes of administration of cannabis for managing period pain. Sometimes tinctures can be used, and even vaginal pessaries, and even topical creams that offer targeted pain relief. However, more research on cannabis and dysmenorrhea is still needed. Back to you, Trenton.
It's really interesting, Carmen, because when in the early days when we had our CBD brand, we used to bring in these menstrual suppositories, CBD suppositories, and had some great results, and it was really helping the people who were buying them. And then SAPRA came in and limited the dosage, and we had to stop bringing them in. But there was, tried and tested cases where people had used this and it had worked. So I didn't know Queen Victoria was a weed user, though. That's really interesting. That's a new fact. It's amazing how these new things are starting to come out, and we realize that cannabis has actually been part of our life for many, many years with many, many people, What would you advise to somebody who has period pain in terms of an entry point to trying cannabis?
Why not start with topicals, especially if you have absolutely no experience with using cannabis in any shape or form? Beginning with a topical preparation of medical cannabis could be very helpful. You can actually just apply it to your tummy area, because remember, you have these endocannabinoid receptors in your skin, and this can really help with targeted relief. Another option is to use a tincture underneath the tongue. So I would go for a CBD-rich tincture and definitely start to use a low dose and progressively work your way up for pain relief.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Carmen. Fascinating as always. Apologies for the video quality there. The cyberspace is not working so nicely, but we are back. Right now we're going to cross to Cuban from his studio car, who's going to talk about cannabis and perpetual harvests. Over to you, Mr. Kwanda.
Hello, CannaSphere. Hi, cannabis community. Today we're out on excursion at the GDOD offices in West Rand for a youth and agriculture meeting. So today I want to speak about perpetual harvest, perpetual cycle, also known as a green cycle for your cannabis. And basically what you're trying to accomplish is to not have a wait before your next crop is going into rotation for flowering and so forth. This way you can get more harvests in within a year. Commercially, this helps obviously to commercialize a business and be able to harvest more and such. And on your home grow, it helps you have more medicine available. So basically what you're doing is you are setting up your rooms. You need more than one room, such that you're able to start your next batch of plants, seeds or clones before the first batch is done. So basically you want to have a seedling and cloning room, a vegetative area and a flowering area. You start your seeds, you obviously start your first run with your seeds, they move into veg, then they go into flower. Then you give about 2 weeks or so before you start your next set of seedlings, such that they go into time. Maths is very important with this. They go into your vegetative room in time such that they veg for about 4 or 5 weeks, and then your let's say 4 to 6 weeks, and then your flowering is done. So the important things to take into account is you need to be planting strains that take the same amount of time to flower, because basically your flower room is dictating your whole flow of your cycle. So you have your plants in your veg. Once your flower room is done, you immediately move those plants from veg into the flowering room, and then they then flower without you having to wait to start from scratch and veg your plants from seedling or clone, and basically deal with that time lapse where you have nothing in your flower room. So essentially, once your cycle is going, you've got plants in every room. Over to you, Trenton.
Yeah, I think one thing people don't realize is when you're growing, especially at a commercial scale, it's essentially a plant factory. So efficiency is important, making sure that everything flows nicely. But the difference is, as opposed to sort of producing a product, manufacturing wise, you're dealing with a plant. So while you can control the inputs, you're still dealing with something that's organic. So I think that's a really good a demonstration of how you can maximize your output. If you're growing medicine at home, or if you're growing commercially, you want to make sure you're getting product out of it. Thanks for that, Cuban. Live coming to you from where did you say we're? Edenvale on the West Rand of Joburg. That's how we do it. We'll see you next week. West Rand is in the house.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Cuban. We'll see you next week. CannaSphere coming to you from Durban, the West Rand today, the Limpopo province, Johannesburg, all over the place, just showing that new technology brings us into all areas. Guys, did you know that Queen Victoria used cannabis? Did you know she was a weed head?
No.
No, I didn't know that either.
No?
That's it. Learn something every day.
Right?
Sorry?
Definitely. Learn something new every day.
What did you say? I didn't hear you. You learn something every day. I hope so. That's why we're here. We're all here to learn, Nigel was making a comment earlier, Noxy, about Americans often say that weed has like a gassy smell, which gas in America is petrol and diesel. I'm not sure if you were like, check this weed out, guys. Look, have a smell. It smells of petrol. I'm not sure if I would really do that. Would you smoke petrol weed?
I've never smoked petrol weed. I always wonder what they mean when they say weed has a chemical-like smell, because for me, it always smells either musty or really flowery or citrusy. So maybe the gassy weed is an American thing.
Yeah, citrusy, lemony, but gassy is just always a bit weird,
Yes.
Cool, guys. I think that's it. I think
that's it as well.
Any last words?
See you next week.
That's a good one. That's my last words too. See you next week. Guys, thanks for joining us on CannaSphere. Tell your friends. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to Cheeba Cannabis TV. If you're watching on DSTV, on CTV, please go onto YouTube and subscribe, and you'll get notifications of lots more content on there. This program is brought to you by Cannabiz Africa and Cheeba Cannabis Academy. If you want to learn about cannabis, check those two websites out. Otherwise, we'll see you same time, same place next week. Peace and love. Ciao.